you did it. Everybody's a little, little slow today, I think, me included. But we have two very lively human beings sitting at this table. They're looking around because they're tired. They were up all night, as many of you were. And this is, again, next of our first year's events in our new space, which we working good. I don't think we need to put the curtains down even. I think it's fine, don't you? It's bright enough. And so this is going to be about two faculty members, both who work in the field of photography, video, and related media for many years, whose interests broaden out into what the image means in the bigger cultural sense. They're both interactive in the social media, in the documentary areas, in the conceptual areas. Many of you have classes with each one of the other of them, Marvin and Oliver. They're both upstaters who come downstate. And I'm happy to have them here. I'm going to let Marvin set the pace for this second edition of his work in the field and his relationship to Oliver about it.
Great. I think I got this. This is working. Yeah, this is working. Thanks for coming today. I know that some of you were here, it was a couple of weeks ago when I did the first talk about seeing science, but seeing science is a project that I'm doing for the University of Maryland, Baltimore County that kind of came out of my interest in looking how photography shapes the world we live in many, many ways. And so I went to the university and said I wanted to do this interdisciplinary project and set up a website, which is what I've got a picture of up on screen, that was purposefully designed to look at photography from a number of perspectives. Photography as data, photography as journalism, photography as art, photography and popular culture, photography and cultural history. And so when I was thinking about the project, one of the things that I really wanted to do was take a look at how the sciences were represented in popular culture and visual culture, and was trying to figure out what the best way to do that was. I mean, I was looking at how scientists were depicted on TV shows and how scientists were represented in movies, but also looking at science in the media, how it's pictured in the media, which is going to be the basis of another project that's happening next month. But when it came to photography and visual culture, I thought, how am I going to deal with this, right? I mean, I can do a lot of curatorial projects on my own, but I thought that as kind of the curator but producer of this piece, that I wanted to bring in some other people to help me figure this out. And so I called up Oliver and asked him if he wanted to be part of this project. And I called him up for a number of reasons. We've known each other for a long time. I met Oliver when he was running a gallery called Cash Newhouse Gallery in the East Village in the 1980s. And for me, it was one of the most interesting galleries at that time. I used to go there all the time, actually, and just to hang out and talk with Oliver and his two partners in the gallery, because they were doing such an interesting job of supporting younger artists and showing really provocative work, and because they were artists themselves, really cared about it and could really talk about it, which was very different than walking into galleries that are not run by artists. So that's kind of when we met, and we've stayed in touch and friends and worked on projects on and off since then. Oliver's work has been featured in a lot of exhibitions in the last couple of years, making it at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He was in Image World, Art and Media Culture, the show I did at the Whitney many years ago. Was in Photography of Invention at the National Gallery of Art in Washington. And his photographs are in a lot of museum collections at this point. Also, Oliver did an amazing project about 4 years ago, Artists Unknown. Yeah,
Sort of ongoing as well.
which he'll talk about today. That was a fantastic book project, exhibition project that I wrote an essay for. So basically what I did was kind of call up Oliver and say, hey, would you be interested in doing a project for me, right? And for this project that would last for a year, and you can have all the leeway you want to, kind of we'll structure it however you want. And he said, yeah. And so that's how the idea for Picturing Science, which is Oliver's contribution to the project, happened. And so we started this about in September, and it's been going on. And Oliver's been posting every week. And so I thought today would be an interesting opportunity for him to talk a little bit about his background and how he kind of evolved as a kind of artist, cultural producer, curator, wearing multiple hats like many of us do. And then we can talk more about what he's been doing for the Seeing Science project.
Thanks, Marvin. Hi. Everybody hear me? So before I say anything, I just have to say, there's like the big elephant in the room here, and I'm just looking out at everybody's faces, and they're kind of like shell-shocked. I slept like 2 hours last night, and my head's not clear, so please bear with me. I'll be honest, as I tried to go to sleep last night and as I woke up this morning, I didn't know how to do this today. I didn't know how to come here and talk to people. And I had a friend who a long post on Facebook today about, how artists just have to make art. And I don't know, I have to go back and read it. I have to process it. And I know that when 9/11 happened, I went through this also. And we've all had crisis of faith and everything, but I just have to say and I do believe that. And, you guys are a lot younger than me and stuff, and I do believe that, the world will go on, and I think art and culture is really important. But I just want to say before I talk today that it's hard. Sorry. I have 2 small children. All right, I'm going to do this. I have 2 small children. It makes me sad. I didn't expect this. I'm sorry. Anyway. I know. Thanks. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a PowerPoint, because PowerPoints are emotionless, passionless things, and that will help. I'm going to try in the process of doing that to talk a little bit. I'm not really used to talking about my work without sort of, this is my work, right? I'm going to talk about, where I started and where I ended and everything. So I'm going to talk about it in relation to a lot of the issues that come up around this project I'm doing with Marvin. And I sort of went back and looked at my career, looked at the sort of trajectory of my relationship to images, and sort of looked at it from a different angle, looked at it in terms of the archive, in terms of my relationship to found images, in terms of my relationship to curatorial practice, to a lot of the things that, I sort of wear 2 hats, and I have a kind of parallel life in the art world. On one hand, I'm a visual artist, I'm a photographer, I make work that is, comes from somewhere in here, and then on the other hand, I have a practice that's more kind of about collecting and archiving, and is more about rearranging images in the world. And these 2, I call them parallel, but they intersect a lot also. So this image that we're looking at up here is, I actually couldn't find a more contemporary image, but when I moved to New York in 1979, I discovered, I don't know if any of you remember this, and I think they still have it. I can't imagine it gets much use. The New York Public Library had a huge room, and it was filled with, and it doesn't really look like this anymore, but I don't know what it looks like now, but when I used it, looked more like sort of bookshelves filled with images. And those images were in folders, and they were categorized under very strange, staircases, couches, TVs, presidents, anything you could think of. This is before Google, obviously. But so you would go in there and you would look up, and there would be magazines that were, pictures cut out of magazines and books that somebody, I don't really know who had this job, but somebody's job was to take images and decide what category to put them in. And I spent a lot of time there, really fascinated by just this kind of weird indexing and archiving of cultural images and detritus. And I used the images in my work, which is one reason why I went there, but I also was just really fascinated with the way pictures were put together, because a picture of a dog on a couch could go under dogs, could go under couches. Why did they choose that picture? So I've always had a relationship, as a lot of people I know have, with other pictures, and I've never had any problem seeing other pictures as being art. I've never, for whatever reason, my upbringing or whatever, I never really had I never really made much of a distinction between fine art and just visual culture in general. And I understand that there is one, and I respect that there is one, but I've always had more interest probably in just pictures at large. In looking for this image, I was reminded, of this, which a few years back, Marvin, maybe you know more about this than I do. I've never actually spent much time looking through this. Have you? Have you been to
Digital collection?
Yeah. So the New York Public Library has basically, just hundreds of thousands of images up. Are they all from the library, or just pictures that they find?
It's from the collection. From
the library's collections, which is hundreds of years old, presumably. So I was sort of struck by this site. Presumably that physical archive, which still exists, has been radically supplanted by this archive, or by Google image search or whatever. So I'm just trying to give some sort of historical perspective, I guess, on when I moved to New York and my relationship to pictures. So at some point, as Marvin mentioned, in the early 80s, I opened an art gallery. I was studying media studies and was interested in art, and saw an art world that was very shut down, that I had no access to. And I knew a lot of artists, and a lot of what was going on in the art world then didn't interest me. It was a lot of sort of expressionist painting and a lot of things that weren't engaged with popular culture, which I was more interested in. So this is an installation by Alan McCullum in our gallery, by the way. So I opened up a gallery and ran that for 4 or 5 years, and became very familiar with the sort of all aspects of the art world, both good and bad. Met a lot of people, met Marvin, met everyone I know pretty much in the art world. Was very grateful for that, but it also left me, to be honest, with a bitter taste in my mouth. And I have always had a kind of love-hate relationship, I guess, with the gallery art world. And I'm very happy to live in a time now where there seem to be creative opportunities that exist outside of that world for people. It's not just a binary between commercial art and fine art. So again, I'm just sort of laying a historical framework here. At that time, in the air, people like Richard Prince and Sherry Levine, and the idea of appropriation was very much in the air, wasn't getting much attention outside of a small group of people. But for me, it was a very liberating thing. I wasn't particularly interested, and I'm not even now interested in the kind of conceptual act of, well, I am interested in the conceptual act of appropriation, but I wasn't like the permission to do what has always seemed like a natural thing to do, which is to look at a picture and maybe zoom in on that picture and find another picture, or to take a picture from one context and put it into another context and redefine its meaning that way. So I really, like, for me, it was just exciting that there were other people doing something like that. Equally exciting, or maybe more exciting for me, was this project by Mike Mandel and Larry Sultan. Yes? Sorry. Like I said, 2 hours sleep. People know this project, Evidence. I just loved this. This was done in the mid-'70s, and this, they basically took images that they found and made a book of them. It's just incredible images. Jack Goldstein, an artist at the time, who was also had a big influence on me, was kind of reusing other media and putting photographs that he would find and putting them into other media. And again, I just sort of threw this in here from a different lecture that I give. It's maybe not quite as applicable here, but this is some of my work from the early 80s. And I was working then, this is obviously pre-digital, I was working a lot with found images and reshooting found images and manipulating them a lot, sort of through homemade special effects. These are 2 different pictures. And I'm not going to talk about the work that much beyond saying that it was made, I'm not going to talk about it except insofar as it relates to this issue of the Seeing Science Project and my relationship to found images and archived images. So I don't know if you can see, but there's the little spires on the Disney building up there sort of exist down at the bottom here, and the little trees in the background there, and that weird nutrosome science thing is, or niosome, is what makes the sort of UFO object there. The point is that I was very interested in finding images and kind of getting to the essence of them and taking little fragments of them, but making something new out of it. So that's what I was doing in the early 80s. And while I didn't have access to computers at the time, I was aware they were being used. And so if you look at some of the backgrounds in, like, this Grape Nuts ad, the way it's broken down, I think they were using Cytex machines to kind of go in there and manipulate them. So I was interested in that relationship between painting and photography as well. Spectacle. So again, I just threw some pictures in here. I'm not going to talk about this work, just to give you an idea of, at some point I bought a computer, and that, these again are all made from pictures that I've taken, pictures I've found, kind of mash them up together. So we're jumping ahead now about 15 years. In the late 90s, or around 2000 or so, I did a project called the Expansible Catalog, where I had been looking at, people know Wallace Nutting's work? So Wallace Nutting is this kind of crazy guy who lived in the middle of the 20th century. And he had a factory of these women that would hand paint photographs he took. And he sold these pictures for $1 or so at 5 and dimes, or at Woolworths. Just made tons of money. You go into any antique store now and you'll find Wallace Nuttings, all hand signed. And again, this is something I talk about at great length when I talk more explicitly about my work. So to try to sort of talk about it in relation to this project and where I'm going, I think at this point I really became very interested in the idea of making work that Wallace Nutting would sell these things for very, very cheap. And it reminded me, or it occurred to me, that what he was doing was similar to what one could do with new digital imaging technology and with new forms of digital output, which is that you could make work cheaply that's archival and theoretically sell it cheaply on the internet. So I did this project where it had a physical manifestation. I would do shows of it also, but mostly it existed as a website where these images, people could go in and buy pictures for very cheap that I made myself, and I would ship them to them. So why do I include that in here? I guess because for me, again, it gets to the idea of art as being something that doesn't have to be precious and rarefied or unique, that could be, you know, have a more kind of populist sort of to it. And I won't go into this in any detail now, but the irony of all of this is that it's easier for me in some ways to sell pictures for more money than it is less money. These are very cheap, but people aren't that interested in buying cheap art if you exist in the fine art world. You know, they're more, they want to pay more money for it. But that's another story for another day. So I made a lot of work really fast, and this is some of it. I'll just quickly, very, very little bit of it that I'll go through. This is an interesting picture that I want to talk about for a second. Marvin's heard this anecdote before, maybe my class has as well, but this is an image I did back in 2007 or something, and I got a phone call from Popular Mechanics magazine, and they wanted to use it as a cover on one of their magazines, which I thought was very strange, but they were doing an issue on UFOs. So I said, great. And make a long story short, I sent them the picture. They sent it back and said it was too grainy. They couldn't use it. I said, well, you know, it's meant to sort of replicate a grainy UFO-looking image. I didn't have my real camera with me that day, and my good camera with me that day. I was photographing UFOs. And this went back and forth, and just to give you an idea, so this is how the image is made. It's pretty simple. It's a photograph I took here of cornfields and a photograph I found of from the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, and I just put them together and made this picture. So this back and forth happened, and they eventually told me, well, we can't run it. I'm sorry. People will just think it's a shitty printing job. So I was out a lot of money. I was disappointed about it. Days later, she calls me back, and she says, well, I had an idea. Maybe we could have our in-house, you know, art person, whatever they're called, remake your image, and we'll still pay you and we'll still give you credit. And I loved that idea. Just if for no other reason, because I could talk about it in situations like this, but it also kind of underscored for me a lot of the weird sort of issues that surround authorship and originality and attribution and, you know, how things are made, and just it's all there. So this is what they came up with. So they used a stock photo, and then they had used some kind of a graphic program to make this UFO up here. I like my picture better, but I you know, I liked that they did it. I thought it was pretty cool. All right. How are we doing on time? What's the sense of?
We're good.
We're good. All right. Sort of want to get to the science project and talk about it, but I want to talk for a minute about my relationship, I guess, to social media, and as of today, to be honest, feels very different. I signed off of Facebook for the first time in my life. It's the first time since I've been on Facebook. I'm a heavy Facebook user. I don't know, maybe some of you are friends of mine on Facebook, but interesting relationship to Facebook. And this morning, I was on Facebook, and I got involved in a conversation with somebody about whether it would have been different if Bernie had been running. And I just what the hell am I doing? It seemed insane, and I really realized that I needed to be in touch with real life again, so I signed off. And I mention that just because, again, it's the elephant in the room. I feel like I have to talk about it, but it also speaks somehow to my interest in social media, too, and that I do I'm very attracted to the collective, shared, crowdsourced relationship that social media has to creativity. But I'm also aware that there is something, today more than ever, I'm aware that there is something about it potentially problematic. So I'll have to rethink that. But anyway, as it is, I spend a lot of time on Pinterest. Can I see a show of hands of people that are on Pinterest? Okay, of you. I find Pinterest to be a fascinating program, and I don't site. What is it? It's not a program. Whatever it is. And I'm not going to spend time talking about how it works for those of you that don't know, but for me, it is that New York Times library now, but it's a library I can make myself. Should I be on AN or GN? Is there a reason this is so slow? GN? Clogging. They're all here. Are you all like out here? Are you all on your phones, like surfing while I'm talking? Should I try a different one? Anyway, you can't see the images, and I guess that doesn't much matter. But so I have 11,900 photographs here.
That might be part of the reason.
They're not all on this page. Thank you very much. You don't think I should try GN just to see? Oops. Let me try refreshing. Oh, this isn't my computer. Is this my computer?
No.
So why did it no log me on? What's up with that? Seth, have you been in my Pinterest account? Seriously, why did my page come up when I clicked on Pinterest?
You click on it from the
Oh, you went for your followed.
AKA Seth is stalking you.
Please do stalk me. I like being stalked. I have no problem with that. My problem is it's been so damn long since I logged on, I don't know if I can remember my... Okay. So I collect a lot of pictures, and I collect them online. I have one small subgroup of pictures that I collect the physical versions of, vernacular photographs, but mostly I collect images online, which is to say that I don't own the physical print, but I have always sort of obsessively collected pictures, and I prefer to do it in the virtual realm. And I used to do this before Pinterest came along. I would just create folders, and if I had, after I realized I had 100 photographs of children with guns, I would make a folder called Kids with Guns, right? And so so basically Pinterest just allows me to do that within a social media program. I have one board here called Stuff, which has 11,026 pins in it, which is unorganized, uncategorized. I have a Facebook activity as well. Couldn't download it. Okay, whatever. This is very weird, showing everybody my Facebook here, but so on Facebook, I will every day, or up until today, I post 4 or 5 pictures, maybe a group of pictures, albums, and I'm really into the sort of dialogue that happens around these pictures. A lot of conversation happens around them. It becomes a kind of social activity for me. Photography in the social media realm is really more of a sort of verb and activity than it is a physical noun. And so, just to give you an idea, I might post an album called, I don't know. So here we've got Women in Photo Booths. It just allows me to post my collection of women in photo booths. Sorry. So I have my Pinterest, and then that's where my photographs are kept, and then Facebook is sort of a different activity where after I post something, if I've taken it from that stuff folder, then I'll put it into organized Pinterest folders. I'll explain it more in a second. Maybe we've got, on a Sunday, I might decide to post baptism pictures. One category that I did that actually ran in New York Magazine as well, now has 300 photographs in it. And it's just a category called Go Over There by the TV. And I'm very interested in collecting analog photographs because it's a closed system. It's a closed thing for the most part. I mean, but I'm still shooting analog, basically done. And so there's millions of analog pictures out there that are the good ones are slowly being uploaded to the internet. And then the better ones are slowly rising to the top themselves. So there's a kind of crowdsourced curatorial activity going around these images themselves, where like a really good one will, sort of become, a good one will rise to the top. But one of the things I notice are certain patterns that don't necessarily exist anymore that are very different from digital. So here we've got, Go Over There by the TV. It's just 300 pictures. And again, with a lot of dialogue and conversation from friends, most of whom I've never met, around these pictures. And to me, what fascinates me about these pictures is that they've been removed from their original context. They're open-ended narratives. We don't know the stories behind them anymore. So I like that people can sort of reanimate them. In fact, I'm working on a project right now with an author where we're posting some of these very mysterious pictures on the internet, soliciting people to sort of supply narratives to them. And then he and I are going to go back. He's an author. He's going to write stories around them. Together we're going to do that. So I'm excited about that project.
So is science a category that came up a lot as you were doing this? I mean, the early work has a lot of scientific imagery in it.
It does. Yeah. Can we talk about that more when I?
Yeah. No.
Yes, we will. It does come up, but I'll talk about some of the differences. Okay, so here's a bunch of Pinterest groups: kids with guns, as I said, Christmas, covered heads, people with animals, etc., etc. Oops. Okay. So, you know what? I'm going to move along, so I did a show, also of sort of in a book that some of you might be seeing is going around, where some of these where I brought this into the physical realm. It's called Artist Unknown. Again, some of the groups is people hiding behind trees. A series called Black and White, photographs of interracial couples from a long time ago. This is a project, again, I could talk about this one for hours. I'm just going to give you a 1-minute synopsis of this. Somebody I don't know on Facebook collects pictures of chat room photographs from around 2000, Yahoo chat room photographs. And I collect my pictures. I were involved in a project where his name is John Monteith, would send him a picture on Facebook or through Facebook chat. He would send me back one from his collection. So here you can see some of these. We always were able to find matching pictures. Kenny and Dustin and so forth. It was a really fun project. All right, I'm going to skip through this. So just to finally bring this back to myself, and then we'll talk about seeing science. One of the genres I'm really interested in of analog photography is the carte de visite, the studio photographs of people in front of painted backgrounds that kind of brings together a lot of my interests in my work. So I have a lot of those. And recently, this is my kid on the right, recently I've been doing a lot of my own sort of studio photographs that have been heavily influenced by that kind of photography. This picture, I don't know if any of you know the Hidden Mother photographs. They're photographs of babies with mothers under blankets, so the babies would hold still while they took the pictures. So I collect a lot of those. So anyway, that is hopefully gives you some kind of a framework to understand my interest in found images. Let me sort of quickly talk about the Picturing Science project, and then throw it back to Maru, and maybe we can open it up for conversation to be more interesting. But you've already been here and heard Marvin talk about the Seeing Science project itself. So the aspect that I'm involved in, the component of it that I'm involved in, is picturing science. And to be honest, the idea of picturing science it really intrigues me, and I'm really having a lot of fun doing it. But I went into it, I didn't know how to interpret it. There are photographs that scientists take that look like art. There are photographs that artists take that look like or are about science. And then there are sort of just in culture itself, in popular culture, of science. And I think of those three things, I'm very interested in all of them, but it's the latter that I'm most interested in. But it's a lot of gray area between them, and I find it kind of hard to figure out how to navigate that. So I'll show you some of the groupings I've come up with, and then we can talk maybe more about some of those difficulties and some of the other issues that it brings up. And then there's the issue of attribution and information. When I do my other projects, I don't ever post an image if I know who took the photograph. That's the only rule I have. If I have to give it attribution, I don't use it because I'm interested in the anonymous, nature of the images. Similarly, I don't ever give backstory. The whole point is to have no backstory, like that Larry Sultan Mandel, project. A lot of the power of the image comes from there being no attached narrative to it. But with this project, photographs about science, there was a lot of really great, like Annie Leibovitz has taken some great photographs of scientists. I just use them. I don't give her attribution. There's Corbis photographs, there's stock photographs. Then there's the issue of narrative. Like a lot of times I feel the need to tell people what they're looking at, but I'm not doing that. And as I go through them, maybe I'll show you some examples. So before we got the news about the results of this election, I was feeling presidential. So I just was curious about the way presidents use science and engage with science to sell themselves, to sell science. So here's a picture of Harding with Goldstein. Roosevelt talking about the Amazon River, and then pretty much every president since the mid-1950s has posed in front of NASA, has gone to NASA and had their picture taken. So there's a lot of pictures of presidents staring at science. It's sort of the Kim Jong-il, is that his name? Like the sort of staring at objects. This is what presidents do. And my favorite one somehow seems appropriate. God, I hope we can laugh again someday at these people. Right? Send me into tears again looking at that one. All right. So some of the other categories. Halloween. And just solar systems. Space shuttles. So no, these are not photographs, taken by scientists of science, but they are what are they? They're pictures of, people engaged with science. And I mean, Einstein really fascinates me because in some ways Einstein is a photograph, right? He's just an image. He's a costume. I grew up, he was the picture of a scientist. So it seemed fitting. Again, I did these on Halloween. Damn, I have to remember this. I have to do kittens and puppies and kids. That's when. So here we've got some dolls. There's a real movement to sort of take dolls and not have them just be so gender specific. So, girls can be scientists too, as long as they have 32-inch waists and 30-inch breasts. That's another story. So these are all dolls. Actually, these are all. X-rays. So again, here's an example of like a category where I'm not going through them and showing you. There's like 12 pictures in each category, and these go back in time. So with X-rays, it was interesting because, I felt the need, like with this image, there is no explanation what this is, right? And I think it would probably benefit from having one, but I decided not to. I think when X-rays were first really sort of being used a lot, and it's just a fake photograph, I guess. Want to guess what this is? Close. Posture. Miss Posture Award. Huh? Pfft, please. And this one too. Like when I found this, I could have read up on what it was, and I just decided not to.
Oh yeah.
I did a category just called scientists, but they were all famous women scientists, and here I did put their names on them. I felt somehow it would have been remiss not to. So let me just quickly go through and show some of the other categories without going through every image. So here we have X-rays, some scientists. I love this picture. Valentina Tereshkova, cosmonaut. She has a lot of medals. Magic lanterns. So this updates every week, by the way, and I really hope people will go and look at them and spread the news. Some scientists staring at beakers. And hopefully, like, y'all know Women Laughing Alone with Salad. I think Marvin mentioned that last time. And hopefully there is some content that is made from the aggregate of the whole here. Like, why do the women look at blue beakers only? Like, women don't look at things that could look like bodily fluid. They don't look at yellow or red, but men do. There's like little codes and things that come up in here. Why do we have 6,000 million photographs of people looking at beakers? And then, of course, there's bad science, which is the way photography has been used by. Also, that's the other thing, is that there's the way that scientists have used photography, and that there's the way that photographs have been, the way science has been photographed. And in some categories, these kind of overlap. Like this is eugenics, the way photography has been used by eugenics, but it's also photographs of eugenics exhibits. Somehow seems appropriate today too. So here we have types. Photography was used to create composite, different types of people, different races, and so forth. So here we see a photo setup for, photographing someone to break down their type. And then sometimes it's just things that kind of have no real relationship to each other than my own sort of fascination with them. I had a sinusitis, and that day I had got a MRI. If any of you ever had an MRI, they put you in that box. So this was my response to that. All right. So we got photographing the bomb, tomorrow's phones. It's another interesting thing is that I have a real interest in things that are old, but I am also sort of feel that it's necessary to kind of bring it into the present as well, and I wrestle with that a lot. All right, Marvin, let me just see what other categories, if there's any. Watching the space landing on TV, animals and science, infrared, forensics is another category, the way photography is used. Museum of Natural History, they extensively photographed weird spacesuit prototypes. And then finally, these images, which I grew up with, science books, and the mad scientists, and so forth. I don't know, Marvin. There you go. That's what
It's an extraordinary bunch of pictures, and it's great to see it happen every week. And pretty much I gave Oliver carte blanche. It's like, here's the code for the website. You just go in and put up pictures, and I kind of see them on Monday, right, when you put them up. And what you were talking about earlier about the fact that scientists make a certain kind of picture and artists make certain kinds of pictures about scientists is exactly the reason that I asked you to do this, because part of my interest was to see how deeply images about scientists permeated culture beyond the sciences and beyond the arts, because that's what everybody conventionally looks at in terms of curatorial kind of projects. And the depth of this. I remember going over to your house and seeing pictures from Scientific American up on a wall, like some portfolio from the 60s that you had gotten. Yeah, and so I just thought, this is really interesting. What's great from my perspective is to be able to give somebody the kind of license to do a project like this and do it on an ongoing basis. And that's why, I don't mind and kind of enjoy watching you think your way through this, because there is no specific agenda. There is no one way to do this. And as some of these pictures are very, very funny, some of them are kind of scary, some of them are historical, some of them are more contemporary. So I think that's great. One of the things that I've gotten very interested in terms of pictures about science is something that Oliver mentioned earlier, this issue of narrative. When scientists make pictures, there's not a whole lot of narrative going on in them. And when the media uses imagery about sciences to illustrate stories or magazine articles or kids' books, whatever, there are these narratives and kind of open-ended narratives, as you mentioned. And so I'm curious if that's something that got you interested. You mentioned earlier the kind of spectacle nature of the images that you were using in your own work.
Right.
Was that part of what got you involved in this? Was this science as spectacle, science as a way of like looking at the present and the future and projecting stories?
Yeah, I think that, to bring it back for a second to my own work in spectacle, my interest in spectacle, for me, the sublime, which is sort of central to my work, which used to be located in the 19th century in nature, has become now located in technology. And we sort of live in the technological sublime, where electricity in some ways is our sunset, and or the nuclear bomb is sort of our volcano, as it was to maybe a romantic painter or something. And I think science, science is this thing that we both fear and respect, much sort of like nature used to be. So science is, most of us don't know science. My father was a mathematician. He taught at the University of Wisconsin, and he spent every day sitting in a chair with a pencil and a notepad, writing numbers and letters and squiggles. I had no idea what the hell he was doing. And that's every day, that's what he did. And it was like this weird feeling of like, we don't know what scientists do. They're the guy with the mustache and the E equals MC squared thing, right? So yeah, so I think, my interest is in that kind of other thing out there that to me is a purely visual kind of effect. For me, my interest in it is entirely void of any content. I don't know what the narrative is. It's the spectacle of science that interests me most.
Yeah, and another element of all of this too is the instability of pictures too, and the kind of ways that they get made and used in the multiple lives that they lead, which is, I think, central to what you do as well.
Well, and that instability is very temporally specific also, in that, pictures look different as time goes on. They gain humor as time goes on. They gain cultural resonance as we start to think about sort of how silly was it that Dow, I'm going to this maybe in a few weeks on this site, but Dow Chemicals used to run ads, maybe some of you have seen them, where like, there's a baby in a plastic bag. Keep the baby clean and germ-free. And it's like, now we look at it like, there's a baby in a plastic bag, get it out. It's like, so I think the shift, there's an ever-shifting meaning to these pictures, and I can create new meanings through them. I think that as an artist, that's what we do, right? And for me, that's one of the reasons why I'm so interested in found images, is because they allow you to reclaim them and redefine them, and God knows that is our culture right now. So for me, in some ways, the limitations of this project, that it's only about science, yet I can sort of define science how I want. It's a weekly kind of thing. That's where the creativity, comes in some ways, by virtue of the restrictions.
Yeah, another thing that this project brings up in my mind is this notion of what winds up on the internet, what kinds of images become available, because I'm acutely aware of the fact that images made before the internet, right, don't always appear on the internet. It takes a lot of time to scan images, it takes money to do it. So I'm curious about like why these pictures actually up there. These reflect, it's not the story of scientists, it's these that are available are about people's interest in science. They went to the trouble, right, of doing this. And I think that's kind of fascinating too. It's like watching people think about images on this subject.
It's also, as an artist, the process of searching for pictures is for me like a really creative, exciting thing. And I don't know, sometimes I think that there are certain artists that really enjoy that. Like I've heard Richard Prince talk about working in the Time Life basement when he first started working, and just being a kid in a candy store, It's like being able to there's something very voyeuristic about it. There's a hunt involved in it. So for me, that's a big part of the creative process. And then when you find certain, it's almost like with science pictures, there's images that are used to sell science. Like you can go to NASA, and I could spend all day, I could fill this thing up with NASA pictures. NASA uses photographs to sell NASA. But then there's photographs that are just for scientists. They're hidden into the darker corners of the internet, where you really have to sort of find them because they're only for scientists to look at. And then there's photographs that don't even know they're about science, but I make them about science in some ways. So that's for me the creative part of it, I guess.
Yeah, and I just wanted to address the issue that you brought up earlier in terms of attribution, right, and kind of captioning pictures. And that was something that I really didn't care about, but we were careful about that, something that we did talk about when you started the project in terms of describing it, that because Oliver is an artist and because Oliver's work is about reusing photographs and recontextualizing them, that's how we can do what we do. I mean, I thought a lot about what the legal issues are in terms of putting these images up there, the ethical issues and the legal issues on it. And so basically we've described the project itself as one of, kind of recontextualizing pictures and transforming pictures through this process. And I think that gives us permission, right, to do this, and also lets people reimagine what science is and what it means, and as you said, what we could even consider a science picture at this point.
And it's really hard to imagine what kind of a person would object, to I don't know, maybe they would, if their image's content or meaning is being redefined or something. I could see them objecting, but
We'll cross that bridge
yeah.
when and if we come.
I guess what I mean by that when I say that is, for me, I don't have an ethical problem with it. There may be a legal problem, I suppose, but
Yeah.
it doesn't. No one is being made fun, and certainly no one's making any money.
Yeah, I mean, but for me, it's a real joy to be able to look at these pictures every week, to give somebody an opportunity to kind of play like this in public. I think is really kind of great. So I invite you all to kind of every week. All of our stuff goes up on Mondays, right?
Yeah, and this came up last time when Marvin was talking a few weeks ago, and I mentioned that my interest in social media and photography is a really, for me, ideally, a interactive, conversational, social one. And somebody had asked about the possibility, I think, of that being part of this site. And I do notice that there, am I right that there is
You can comment.
one can make comments at the bottom here.
Uh-huh.
So if anybody is motivated to, I would love that. But I think it would probably be more if there was a way of having it sort of
Ongoing conversation.
I don't know that there is, and I don't know if there needs to be. But because there's things like this also. But I guess I'm saying that for me, that's ultimately what brings this stuff, makes it more fun for me to do. You can get that.
Does anybody have any questions? Any questions? Suggestions as the subject matter?
Does anybody out there use science images in their work? Really? No? Anybody engage in any way with science in their work? Wow. Huh? You studied physics? And did you ever engage with photography and studying physics?
Not really. I studied optics and light, which is really helpful for me to understand light and optics. But like, one discussion I had with Marvin was I used to do experiments in terms of science. I didn't thought of music, and my protocol was focused on the experiment itself, not to get the picture.
I see.
But when it becomes to art, then the photography is more important than the experiment at times. So that's something that I think about art and science sometimes.
Right. I mean, one of the interesting things about considering photography and science is that photography is so inextricably interwoven with science itself. The science of light and all of that. And I actually haven't really researched that much, but there, there's a kind of meta thing going on there. And you guys are all interested in photography and related media, but I think if you look at the early days of photography, analog photography, there were scientists, right? But again, as science gets more and more removed from us, and we are just consumers and we're not sort of actively engaged, now, I don't know what happens. I feel like my mother sometimes when I try to, she's like, where's the picture? I go, it's in the camera. But where's the picture? It's like we don't have that physical thing anymore. So.
No, but the relationship keeps going. It's one of the things that fascinates me. As you said, the first photographs are made by scientists, right? Amateur scientists, sort of artists who were kind of hyphenated interdisciplinary, people. And now what's interesting to me about the relationship to science, you may not make pictures about science, but science absolutely determines everything that you make, right? Every kind of photographic material, every image you shoot is a combination of math and physics and optics, and every print you make is about chemistry, whether it's in a dark room or even just print on paper. So they never kind of separate. And in terms of the way that science is kind of redefining photography in terms of computational photography, that's one of the things that interests me the most now. So,
I mean, I would just, since most of you are students here, I would also just say that, I think that one of the things I love about Marvin's relationship to photography, and always has, and frankly this program, which has been called Photography and Related Media since, I've been involved with it in the early 90s, is that it has a very sort of expansive view of what photography is and what am I trying to say? I encourage you all, I think, to look at pictures of science and to sort of think about pictures side of the art world. I mean, I know that a lot of you already do, but if nothing else, a project like this is a manifestation, an embodiment of all of Marvin's relationship to photography as long as I've known him, which is a very sort of expanded view of it. And I encourage you all, whether you have an interest in science photography or not, to sort of to take this as a model of I feel like Marvin's doing science now, but it could be fame, it could be any number of other things. It's, like if you know his book, Photography Changes Everything, right? I have the title right? It's about looking at everything and in terms of its relationship to photography. So that's my bid for that.
great. Well, thank you very
Thanks,
much
all.
for doing this. Yeah. Was I what? Sorry.
Howard Stein.
No. No. No.
Well, Howard Stein, for those who don't know, was a financier and big collector of photography back the press. Not the Dreyfus one. One of his interests was with science, and particularly with medical research. I'm sorry, NSAIDs at the time. And he asked me to put together a luncheon where we brought together scientists, artists, and photographers, and people from our world at an all-day conference at Keen's Steakhouse upstairs. It was quite an event. I thought you were there, but anyway, Carol may have been there. I don't remember. And long story short, the idea was he was going to sort of figure out how these artists, of which 6 of the people, 7 were artists and 7 were scientists, could work together and come up with something meaningful. In the course of, and we had some poets there and writers, different people, some very well-known people and very well-known scientists, by the way. And the bottom line of the conference was, in the end of the day at 4:30 in the afternoon, 5 o'clock, was the scientists were saying, yeah, this is great, but are you going to pay for somebody like an artist or pay for me to work with the artist for a year? Nothing can just happen because somebody drops into my lab and just starts making pictures. And the same token, the artist said, yeah, well, a scientist come look at my picture and say, I see this. But there has to be a synergistic co-relationship between the two to produce something. Then subsequently, there were some examples given of that did happen, and it was really fascinating. And the issue was that scientists and artists learned how to see something fresh, learning how to see something from a perspective by which they were not seeing it in the past, or just because of their discipline were unable to see it. That's where some really great breakthroughs have come through, not as a result of that particular conference, but I just wanted to note that both that failure, but also that success of that final conclusion, that if you're going to do it, you got to really engage in the other discipline at length. You can't just be a sort of parachute inner dropper. The other thing I wanted to mention that Marvin probably knows, and Oliver, Harold Edgerton. Do you all know who he was? Harold Edgerton, Dr. Harold Edgerton. He invented the flash strobe at MIT, figured out how to light. Everything you all do relates back. He was an important scientist, engineer.
You know his famous milk
famous
crown,
pictures.
of course.
And he nurtured a lot of artists as well as light engineers and scientists who crossed the boundaries at MIT. And there's a lot of that going on at MIT presently. But one of the interesting projects that they did was he got all his photo students, he had photo students, to go to photograph every lab at MIT. And that's a fascinating collection of pictures. So you might want to reference that.
Yeah.
And it goes back to book evidence, except these were real working labs, and each one takes a different character and almost a kind of abstraction because of what in them. There's like 40 labs, something like that. Anyway.
You know, just to throw one other thing out here, if you look at contemporary art, I mean, scientific photography is just central to so much, particularly early modernist art, whether it's Duchamp's Nude Descending a Staircase, coming straight out of Muybridge's motion studies, or futurism in general in its relationship to film and to motion study, time motion study. And I think that we live in a time right now with new technologies where, particularly in retrospect, we'll be able to look back and see, like, you know, just how central technological determinists, maybe I see this more than most people, but just how central technological change in science is to the, to the aesthetics, to the visual that artists are making. So it's something to think about whether you directly engage with it or not.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to the introduction of X-rays, right? I mean, you showed the photograph of the first X-ray.
Yeah.
This
Oh, yeah,
this guy named William Röntgen in 1895. He took an X-ray of his wife's hand, right? And it was widely published, and it was published all around the world and completely transformed the way people thought about their bodies, thought about the world, thought about imagery. So that's a case where, at certain times, scientific imaging transforms the way we think, and keep thinking about the images that do it. So the first X-ray does it, the images of bomb blasts do it, Muybridge does it, Edgerton does it. So I think that scientific imaging really does impact the way that artists see things and the way we all see things. And then going back to what Charlie was saying, which is of interest to me, is Howard Stein, the guy that mentioned, I didn't go to that meeting, but he called me and my business partner at the time up one day and said, hey, do you want to do a project about the brain? And he was trying to, this was, 1996 or something like that. And he was trying to get museums around the country to do shows about images of the brain and about the brain, and nobody would do it. But it's what started me thinking about science. And when I did started doing projects about science, which was through his for profit, actually, and started hanging out with scientists, that's when I understand the link between scientists and artists. And in fact, talking to scientists turned out to be as interesting, as much fun as talking with artists, because of that kind of curiosity that they've gotten, the willingness to take risks and make mistakes and kind of see what the world is like. So I think there's lots of, similarities in the ways that artists and scientists think, which is, yeah.
I mean, I've never talked to a scientist, and I knew a lot of them because of my father, and not when I mentioned that I was an artist, they would sort of make a plea for the fact that they were too, and in a very convincing sort of way. I wonder if there must have been books written on this issue before. Like
Well, there's always people trying to look at creativity. There's always people trying to reconcile the sciences and arts and humanities, and it's kind of an ongoing thing. But what you said is, the case. I remember when I did the big Paradise Now show, and there were probably 30 artists in the show, and we invited everybody to Rockefeller University and meet with the research scientists there and had a big cocktail party, and everybody, got drinking and talking, and a lot of people were working together, which was really interesting thing. I think there's lots to talk about. And what's nice about the project is it's an opportunity to do it.
So check in on Mondays.
Yeah,
That's it. Keep making art.
great. Thanks.